Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you are doing well. This is Jonathan from Venture 19, and I am so excited to have you as a part of our first ever webinar on responsive fundraising. And I'm extremely excited to welcome in a great strategic partner of ours. They are Virtuous. And Virtuous is doing incredible work, not just in our local community, but literally around the country. And Virtuous, if you don't know, is the responsive CRM and fundraising platform that helps your nonprofit easily create personalized donor experiences to help you grow your giving. And we certainly all need that. And so guys, I'm excited to have you with us. We have Noah Barnett with us. He is the Director of Partnerships and Community at Virtuous. And Gabe Cooper is also with us. He's the founder and CEO of Virtuous and author of the recently released book, Responsive Fundraising, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail later on. And guys, so great to have you with us. And Gabe, I especially love your picture here. It looks like somebody caught you in the middle of maybe an impromptu dance move or something. So love the picture, but guys, glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. We're grateful for the opportunity to share some of our insights and learn together this morning.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, Noah is going to be leading our discussion today. And so I'm going to turn things over to him in just a minute. But first, I'd love to pray for us. So let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for just this time together. And I thank you for these leaders and for the incredible work that they're doing. God, I just pray that you would meet with us today in a special way and help us to hear what you want us to hear individually. We just commit this time to you, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
So as Jonathan mentioned, we're going to be talking a lot about what fundraising looks like amidst our current moment of crisis. And that's not just because of COVID-19, but there's quarantine and market meltdowns and kind of unfettering uncertainty. And so we kind of want to unpack some of this. And this is based on some of our research that we've done with our clients here at Virtuous. We get to work with a variety of different types of organizations, many of which are faith-based and ministries around the country. And we're grateful to kind of share some of those learnings with you this morning and also kind of have a dialogue between Gabe, Jonathan, and I on how ministries should be thinking about this. How can they be navigating, especially as it relates to fundraising amidst the current moment? And so here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover throughout this morning's presentation. We're going to talk about the new normal and just lay it out there and kind of outline, what's the reality of this? What are the facts? We're also going to be talking about responsive fundraising, which is based on, or Gabe's going to be sharing about responsive fundraising, which is based on the book that Jonathan mentioned. And so we're excited to kind of share that framework with you. Oh.
Do we lose you, Noah?
I'm not sure. Hang on one second. Sorry, my audio got all messed up. I apologize. Can you guys still hear me all right?
Yeah, we've still got you good. We've still got you good. Yep.
That was very strange. This is what happens. I had my headphones in, but I was listening to a phone call that my wife was having in the other room because my headphones connected to the wrong thing. So sorry about that. I was like, what's going on? But anyways, we're going to progress on.
Beauty of live production here.
I know. It's just how life works, right? We just roll with it. But as I mentioned, Gabe's going to be sharing about the framework that we've put together on responsive fundraising and share a little bit more from his newly published book. And then we're going to talk about reality and share 6 strategies to really maximize your impact during the crisis. But more importantly, how you can actually emerge from the crisis and thrive in what we believe is going to be the new normal going forward. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box within Zoom. That's going to make it easiest for us to be able to address those questions and the most pressing issues facing you and your teams at your various ministries. So let's go ahead and dive in. So we know that the world you fundraise in or kind of do ministry in or work in has just fundamentally shifted. And it has been shifting over the years, but the current crisis moment has kind of accelerated some of these transitions. And what we've seen is that COVID-19 has really shaken us in a lot of different ways. And some of those realities, like we mentioned, are quarantine, shelter in place, business and school closures, mandatory work from home, and even market drops and economic fallouts. And so I know this is something we've been monitoring, but Jonathan, what have you seen as it relates to this new reality for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of different leaders, and I think everybody's just trying to adapt and figure out the right way forward. I think everybody understands that things have changed, and there's a little bit of a learning curve, though, in trying to figure out what the right path is, because everybody processes this a little bit differently, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think being sensitive to where people are and giving them the space that they need to figure things out, but at the same time acknowledging that, like you said, it is a new reality. And so what does that mean, and how are we supposed to handle that as nonprofits moving forward?
Yeah. And I think like what we've seen is that there's so many different types of ways that this work has impacted nonprofits. And I know in our work, we've seen this, and, we've been talking to nonprofits around the country and just seeing everything from operational shifts to canceled events and travel restrictions to distributed teams and work from home for the first time, or funding shortages, which is a huge challenge for a lot of organizations that are trying to identify how they really can fund their work, because they're doing important work, but how do they fund that going forward? And ultimately, this has led to a lot of vulnerability and uncertainty. And I know we're seeing this just all across the board, whether you're on the front lines or supporting other societal needs that are even unrelated to the current crisis moment. And this has obviously led to a lot of challenges for nonprofits, and we're seeing that. And I think, I don't want to steal your quote, Gabe, but Gabe always says this is the saddest picture we could find on a free stock image site. So this is just sometimes the reality of what leaders are going through. And what we know about these types of moments is that some organizations will thrive from this increased chaos. Some will be unprepared, and some will merely fight it and lose. And the reality is that this happens every time there's kind of a crisis moment, especially one of this magnitude. And so what our hope is through this presentation and some of the frameworks we're going to share is to at least provide like a framing and a foundation that's going to help you thrive as we move through this moment of time. So we want to kind of stop there, and Jonathan, I'll kick it back over to you, but we want to make sure that we're addressing what's top of mind. So we're curious if you can drop this in the Q&A window, like what's top of mind for you right now as you navigate these challenges? We'd love to see your input.
Yeah, a lot of leaders are facing, like we said, a lot of challenges, and I'm hearing so many different stories, and of course, a lot of questions on how do we handle people the right way. How are we sensitive to where people are? And then, of course, Noah, right, what does fundraising need to look like right now? What sort of, what's sensitivity look like? What's proper protocol look like? And so you guys may have a lot of questions connected with those topics, or really anything else that we're going to talk about today. So feel free to send those in, and we'll pause in a couple spots and get to some of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we do want to do is not just focus on the reality of the challenges, but there's also is some good news as we look at the current moment. Like it's not all bad news. And what we know is that this will end. We will get past this current crisis moment and all the restrictions. And we have history to reference. The other important thing is that we serve, like you serve a societal need. You're providing value. You're serving the community. And was important. If your work was important prior to COVID-19, it's still important in the midst of and after COVID-19. And the other thing too is that we're seeing in all the data and at least here at Virtuous and through some other sources that donors still want to hear from us. They're eager to give. Online giving across a few different metrics have actually been increasing for a lot of organizations over the past 30, 45 days. And that's not just those serving on the front lines, but others that are still serving and working alongside the needs of our communities. And the last point here is that we want to encourage, we're in the hope business. And so it's important that we all keep a mindset that we keep going, we keep relating, and we keep fundraising. We know donors are resilient. Giving overall is less volatile than the market if we look at history. And we've seen this across a multitude of crises. And so it's still important to keep fundraising, keep relating with your supporters. One thing I love about this quote from Bill Burnett, who's the executive director at the design program at Stanford, is he talks about gravity problems as unchangeable, irreversible, and long lasting. Just like gravity, these problems exist like a law of nature. They're fixed, and the only way to really handle them is to accept the situation for what it is or reframe the way we think about it. And our hope, even though there's a lot of problems right now, but we feel like they are many of them are gravity problems, and it's our role to help reframe how we think about them and look for a path forward. And that's what we hope to provide here today. And the plan we always recommend for organizations amidst this time is really to take care of yourself and your team first. Caring and stewarding and providing for your teams and yourself is so important during these crisis moments. But then also making sure you're auditing your upcoming fundraising campaigns or communication campaigns and making notes of changes that are going to be needed. Because it's not just now, it's actually as we look forward. We know organizations are already looking at fall events and other opportunities that they have in considering, what is it going to look like then? And so making sure you're mapping that out is really key. And then the third thing is really to evaluate your funding sources. So looking at kind of the funding that comes in from your program, where are there going to be inevitable gaps, but also where are there amazing opportunities for you to tap into, maybe an area that wasn't a highlight or a focus previously, but could open up new opportunities of funding for you and your organization amidst the current moment. And the last point I think is the most important, and we're going to provide some feedback on what this might look like or how you can think about this. But what I love about this is that we really recommend sketching out short-term realistic action plans. And each of those words are so important. The idea that we should sketch something is because I think all of us as leaders, whether it's in the for-profit, nonprofit ministry or whatnot, we all need to get really comfortable with our big pink erasers and understand that the plans that we write out are just that. Things are changing so quickly that we need to be okay that we're really just sketching a plan and getting comfortable with changing that as we need to. And also looking at it from a short-term and a realistic approach and making sure it's actionable. One thing that's been consistent over all the feedback we've gotten over the past 30 days from nonprofit leaders and others is to take action. We can't just get frozen. We really have to push forward, even if it's in the smallest ways. There was a executive director that we talked to last week that said, every day, all I can do is I can manage our programs because we're serving, a vulnerable population. And I try to call one donor, and that's her action plan. Every day she tries to call one donor because that's all she can do right now, but it's focusing on what she can do instead of the constraints. And I think that's the power of reframing. And hopefully we can, provide some of that as well throughout today's presentation. So Jonathan or Gabe, anything to add here as far as how leaders or ministries should be thinking about the plan forward before we dive through?
I love the idea of the eraser. I think it's incredibly critical, but I think making sure that you're pushing that down to your team. One thing that we've talked about a lot lately are micro goals for your team. So if you had big quarterly goals or annual goals in terms of fundraising or what you wanted your program to accomplish, a lot of those are sort of out the window now or very, very uncertain. Sometimes that can be disconcerting for your team. They had in mind what they wanted to accomplish. And so now they don't know what's next. And so I think especially leaders in the group today being able to communicate to your team micro goals, like, okay, let's not worry about this quarter. Let's worry about today. What do we want to accomplish today? What do we want to accomplish this week? And really increasing the number of check-ins you're doing with your team and your donors for that matter, but especially your team, to say almost like daily stand-ups or multiple times a week getting on a Zoom call and say, hey, we talked about, these are the 5 things we wanted to accomplish. How do we do? How can I help you? And so I think thinking in terms of those micro goals can be really, really powerful in just giving your team sort of purpose and direction in uncertain times. We've seen that be really successful from our end.
Yeah, I love that concept. I was thinking the same thing, Gabe. When we talk about short-term realistic plans, it's like those may need to be 24-hour plans at this point, right? And so certainly things have changed, and those plans need to be shorter, and we need to be able to reach those goals. So I love the concept of micro goals as well. It's great.
Yeah. And I think what it really comes down to is, how do you reduce the time that lapses between reevaluation? Like, how do you circle back more often? So shortening those cycles is going to be key. And we want to kind of provide 2 real things here. The first is that we want to provide kind of a framing to help you think about those actionable goals. Like, what does fundraising look like in the new normal? But then also provide some actionable, practical things that we've seen organizations doing that we might be able to glean from and learn from, so that you can implement similar things within your organization. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Gabe so he can kind of walk us through some of this foundational thinking that's going to help us excel through and beyond this current crisis. Gabe?
Yeah, thanks so much, Noah. I really appreciate it. So what we talk a lot about is that our new normal requires new approaches. And it kind of comes from this overall theme that we call responsive fundraising. And it's the way that growing nonprofits are using technology to treat all their donors like major donors. I think the reality is this new normal was kind of evolving even before our current crisis. In fact, it's kind of been in place for the last 15 years. What we're seeing is that donors' trust is beginning to erode in nonprofits. They're getting incredibly personal touches from other brands, whether it's hyper-curated experiences on Facebook or Spotify magically knowing what you listen to. They're getting really personal touches. At the same time, they're sort of losing faith in large institutions. And so this has caused like sort of tremendous donor churn and increasing every year in the nonprofit space, and over-reliance on major donors. And I think what COVID has done is just sort of brought this to light a lot faster than a lot of people would have expected. And so people have talked for a long time, hey, we need to, build out more recurring givers, or we need to be less dependent on events or less dependent on major donors. And it's been hard to get the motivation to move the ball. But now all of a sudden, your major donors just lost 1/3 of their portfolio, or your spring events got canceled. And so COVID has kind of become the thing that's forced innovation or forced nonprofits to deal with this new reality. And so, you can go back there one slide, Noah. Yeah. So the framework we talk about here is the responsive framework. And so basically a way that you can treat all your donors like major donors by putting donors at the very center of your fundraising strategy. We'll get into more detail on this, but basically it's the idea that, look, if you're treating your major donors well by really listening to their needs, figuring out why they give, what their intent is, what they're interested in, you're listening to them. And so how can we begin to listen to all of our constituents in the way that we would listen to a major donor? And then after we've listened and understood the sort of needs of every donor, how do we begin to connect with donors in a very personal way at scale? And so those same sort of, you take your major donors out to dinner, or you meet them for coffee and you're connecting with them in a personal way. How do we begin to do that more broadly to everybody who our ministry touches? And then finally, how do we suggest the right giving option at the right time? And by the way, a giving option isn't always money. And sometimes it's, it can be time or social capital, but sometimes it's just thinking about how do we give to our donors first in a meaningful way, and just knowing that generosity begets generosity, and knowing where somebody is in their donor journey, what their engagement level is with us. And so understanding how to suggest the right best next steps at the right time. So you can jump there, Noah. So I alluded to this a little bit, but I think technology has drastically changed how your donors communicate, connect, and learn. And so you all know this, we're all living in a Zoom generation right now, but we are more hyper-connected as ever. If you think about the COVID crisis, what would have happened in our country 40 years ago, how isolated we would have felt. And really it would have been just maybe phone calls is the only way we could connect. And now look at us, we're broadcasting on video in 3 different locations to a big group of people, right? And so technology has really changed the way that we connect. And so one of the big changes here has been the shift to more of a reliance on recommendations by friends. So recent research from the Case Foundation about generosity says now more than ever, more than half the time, folks are relying on recommendations by friends and family about their generosity decision. It's no longer the large sort of institutional appeals or the, you know, the talking head getting on TV and broadcasting live that's making people give. It's recommendations by friends, and that happens in our social networks. It happens in our smaller communities, and often happens digitally. The other big shift here is donors want to be part of your cause. They don't want to feel like they're an ATM machine. Right. So forever, we sort of got away with, especially ministries, they were sort of like the intermediary between the donor and the good that was happening in the world. And so you got a large, you know, somebody sent you an appeal in the mail, and you thought, man, I'm not really sure what they're doing with the money, but this is the best shot I have at making a difference. So you send your money in, they ask you for money the next month, you send your money in, and it kind of goes on like that. It's not that there's anything fundamentally wrong with that, but now the expectation is, with sort of an eroding trust in institutions, that people want to be brought close to your cause. They just don't want to think that they're just a checkbook or pocketbook, but they want to feel like they're intimately involved in what you have going on. And then finally, we talked about this before, but people expect personalized experiences across all areas of their lives. And so, Noah, you can jump to that next slide. And the reason people expect personalization is it's everywhere. And so if you guys are like me, you've probably popped open Netflix in the last week about 1 million times, right? Or Disney Plus, or Spotify, or your Audible app. And one of the things that you'll notice is all of these brands seem to know everything about you. They know what you want to watch next. They know what you want to eat and when you want to eat. They know what kind of clothes you want to wear. They know you have kids. They know what your kids need. Our brand experiences today are hyper personalized to us. And the reality is your donors now expect this kind of personalization across all areas of their life. If they're being brought close by Patagonia or Starbucks or Netflix, certainly they think the charities that they care about the most should be able to bring them close in a personal way to what's going on, to make them feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so the problem is nonprofits historically have relied on these very impersonal, unresponsive tactics that alienate the majority of donors. And so if you're like the ministry that I worked with, your fundraising tactics probably look something like this. On the left-hand side, we have our, let's call it our top 100 donors. And we know everything about those top 100 donors. We know their kids' names. We know where they like to eat Mexican food. We know why they gave initially. They know, hey, we have an adoption and foster care ministry, and we know that they adopted one of their kids, and so it's a cause very close to their heart. We know that about them. The next 1,000 people on their file, or 10,000 people on their file, they're just names and numbers in a database. They're all getting the exact same email. They're all getting the exact same monthly newsletter or update. they're nameless, faceless transactions, and they begin to feel that way. And especially in our current age where all their other brand experiences are personalized, they begin to feel very alienated because what they get from their favorite nonprofit is often so impersonal. And so the result of this is a bit of a generosity crisis in this country. So we're seeing these numbers slide in the wrong direction year after year. So currently in the US, about 76% of people will give a single gift to a nonprofit and then never give again. And so after the first gift, they often feel so alienated by the communication that comes in that it's a wet blanket on generosity and they never give again. And most nonprofits are losing and having to replenish half of their donors every single year. We believe that this model is unsustainable. New donor acquisition is too hard to be replacing half of your file every year. And it creates this sort of hamster wheel for nonprofits where they're always worried about funding and they're just chasing the next new donor while half their donors churn out the bottom of the funnel. And so in response of fundraising, really what we want to do is use modern technology to foster genuine connections and create personal engagement for every donor. So the way you treat a major donor, we want you to be able to treat all of your donors like that using technology. And you say, yeah, sure, we're super short-staffed. We barely have time to call our major donors. There's no way with our current resources we can build a personal relationship with all of our donors. And we say, yeah, of course you can't, but you know what? Amazon can't either. Amazon doesn't have a staff member assigned to me that knows that I need to reorder Nerf darts or new socks tomorrow for my kids, right? But what they're doing is using big data and analytics to watch my behavior, to listen to what I'm doing, and then using technology to respond to me in a more personal way, in a way that makes me feel more connected and engaged in what they're doing. And those same sort of tools today are available to nonprofits to really be able to begin listening at scale, just like you would with a major donor, connecting with each person personally based on their behavior and the signals that they're giving, and then suggesting the best next step based on where they're at and their donor journey. And when you can do this well, what we see is instead of 76% of your donors churning after that first gift, what you see is 50% or only 25% churn out, 75% stick around for that second gift, that third gift. And what you begin to build is predictable, sustainable revenue for your ministry based on really personalized relationships at scale. And that creates this amazing platform for you to do the good work you want to do in the world.
Yeah, I love that. A couple things. I heard that, by the way, Gabe, that Disney Plus has had 50 million new subscribers since COVID-19 has hit. So, so a lot of people are on Disney Plus. I love the concept of treating all donors like major donors. And I think, Gabe, I've heard you talk about in the past, right? We shouldn't see Jonathan as an example as donor number 782. Right. It's gotta be something different than that. And I think to a lot of groups that are saying, I'm short staffed or how do I do this? I love the fact that you're talking about how we can address that through technology. And then the other thing I like to say is everybody can start somewhere. And so what does that look like? And what's the group of people that you need to start with and that you even feel like God is sort of leading you to start with? Who needs that extra touch? Whose story do you need to learn a little bit? What person do you need to learn a little bit more about their story? And so identifying just places to begin that process. Love that concept.
Yeah, and I know Noah will talk a little bit about this as we go, but I think being able to even take basic steps at segmenting your donors based on their persona or what they care about. So yeah, I was actually just I'm on a board of adoption and foster care organization. It's a cause close to my heart. And so, and we're thinking through like, why are people giving to you? You know why your major donors are giving to you, but what was their original intent? Is it because they have adopted a kid of their own and so now they're passionate about your cause? Is it because they couldn't have kids of their own. And so this is a way to bring a child close to their family. Or do they just recognize that systemic, holistic change in adoption and foster care creates cultural flourishing? And it's not so much about an individual kid as it is about sort of flourishing in a culture or country. And even understanding basic things like that, being able to segment those personas and have different conversations with each of those in your marketing material or communication material, just something that simple can be such a powerful way to start. And I know Noah will get into a little bit of the specific tactics you can use to begin doing that. But I think that sort of thing is just so powerful in beginning to build relationships.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we encourage leaders to think through when they're looking at what should we be listening to, when we say listen to donor signals, what does that mean? And what I found helpful as I've even been, learning through this and, in my work with Christian humanitarian nonprofits and others is to break it into 3 categories. The first is like, what's the involvement someone has with your organization? How engaged are they? Are they a new donor? Are they a 10-year veteran donor? Are they giving a lot? Are they giving a little? Are they a volunteer too? So there's this level of like involvement signals that donors are telling us through their behaviors and through their actions. The next one is their interests. So like, what part of your work are they interested in? What web pages are they looking at? What emails are they clicking on? What events have they attended in the past? What was the subject of that? So the second component is interest. What signals are they telling you? And the third, which Gabe just gave a great example of, is intent. Like, why do they actually give to you? Like, what's the heartbeat that they give to you? And involvement, interest, and intent all allow you to begin connecting in a more personal way, but almost more importantly, begin suggesting the next right thing for those individuals. Because as Gabe mentioned in Gabe's example, like if someone's passionate because they have a personal adoption story in their own lives, the next right thing for them might be different than someone that looks at it from more of like a macroeconomic development standpoint that's saying, this is the best investment that we can make. And so what you're asking those individuals to get involved in might be different. And that's where listening becomes so essential. It's not just listening because it's the right thing to do. It's so that you can cultivate a better, more lasting relationship with those donors. And we're going to provide some just practical ways that we're seeing this happen. And so this is kind of, if you're more of a practical person, this is the meat of this. This is going to be 6 strategies that are really going to help you build those lasting donor relationships. And so, so the first thing that we're going to dive into here is what we call contextual messaging. And this is almost what I just referenced, is though you may not be working directly on the current crisis, you're still trying to serve a societal need and should look for opportunities to contextualize your message in a way that's going to allow you to bridge the gap between what your supporters are experiencing, what's going on in their lives right now, and what they're experiencing and exposed to, and how does that relate to the work that you are doing. And we've seen this done really well by a few organizations. One organization that I've been supporting for years is an organization called Charity Water, and they serve, or their mission is to provide everyone access to clean water. And there was about 700 million people around the world that don't have access to that. And March 22nd was World Water Day, a very important day for those charities working on the worldwide water crisis. And one thing that they focused on was like, how do we bridge this gap? And they know that clean water, and it actually provides healthy sanitation practices. Without that, without healthy sanitation practices, regardless of the moment we're in, it can cause a devastating impact on that community. And because we're all talking about hand washing, they leverage that as an opportunity to bridge the gap between what we're personally experiencing in their supporters and their cause, while still being able to not drift away from their mission. And one other thing that they did was they knew that some people might not be able to give because there's obviously been, there was financial uncertainty and a lot of unemployment and other things. But what they had was they had a major donor actually donate money for everybody who took this quiz. And so instead of using the World Water Day as a financial fundraising opportunity, they used it as an advocacy and awareness campaign. And so people could contribute, share this message out. They were able to still expose their mission to a bunch of people. And it was a huge success, and they were able to celebrate this. And I think in midst of uncertainty and crisis, this idea of celebration is really powerful.
And I'll just add two things here real quick too, is I think for you as nonprofits right now, raising in the midst of COVID, number one, Noah said this already, but if your mission was important before COVID, it's important now.
Absolutely.
Generosity is the heart of God. And so we don't get off the hook for encouraging people to be generous. In fact, in times of crisis, they're more generous than ever. So
right.
don't turn off the faucet of generosity and stop asking. What you're doing is you're denying the people that you're working with the opportunity to support you and make a difference in the world, which is what they need in this current moment. But paired with that is you can't be tone deaf and pretend like it's not happening. And so as you begin thinking about and talking about generosity in our current moment, you have to be incredibly empathetic. You have to understand that people are in a different place. You have to not just stick your head in the ground, but you have to acknowledge what's going on in the world right now. And even if your cause isn't directly connected to it, you have to know that your folks that you serve and your donors are in a new normal. And so there's this great mix of how do I encourage generosity? How do I engage people in my cause? But at the same time, how do I do it without being tone deaf to our current moment?
Yeah, no, and I think it's so important too, because I think like you mentioned, our missions are so important that we need to be creative in how we still present that with also out drifting completely. And there was another example that I brought in here by an organization called WOTC, who has kind of a mission that they believe everyone should have the right to healthcare, especially those living in impoverished communities. They tackle this issue from an international development standpoint, not like the current US political narrative. It's completely different. But they're saying, hey, even the most vulnerable should have access to healthcare. And they tap into this context of like right now more than ever, the access to healthcare is a prominent topic. And they wanted to kind of re-expose in a way that they typically do to their commitment to focusing in on that. And it was just a brilliant piece that they wrote to say, we don't know the best way forward, but we know that we're focusing on this and this is more important than ever. And so they were able to bridge that gap, which was really powerful as kind of reinforcing both their values and their mission while still being, culturally or contextually sensitive to the current moment. Another organization that provides services to those impacted by homelessness, especially women and children in a small community in Virginia, they said, hey, due to the essential nature of our work, we will not stop serving our vulnerable neighbors. And I love that line, like during this time, but we'll rather creatively identify solutions to continue to end homelessness in Central Virginia. They started out with that. They said, we are still committed because this is essential. And it was just a powerful statement.
I love that. And I've been reminding leaders, I believe we're in place. We're in existence as nonprofits for times exactly like this, right? Our work becomes almost more important in some ways, right? And so I think reminding people that we are still here doing what God is calling us to do, and making that connection on how our givers can continue to help drive that forward and be a part of it, because our givers are looking for ways to help and make a difference. And those main ways, I believe, are by helping the work of these great nonprofits continue to move forward in times like this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I think it's been really neat to see from our vantage how organizations are using the constraints as new design space to creatively still serve and support the missions that they've been dedicated to. And Miriam's house is a great example of that. The other reality here is not only just contextualizing your message, but there's a shift, like there's constraints on us where we've had to shift from in-person to online. And I know if those participating today or like many others we've been engaging with, is that this has been a huge impact. Whether it was large scale galas or regional events or one-on-one donor meetings, in-person connection is actually a staple of many fundraising plans, let alone the ministry work that you might be doing. But in a world where that's not possible, we have to consider how we can bring these experiences online. And I think there's been a lot of great research and kind of ideas on what this looks like, whether it's digital galas or donor events, virtual runs, walks, and challenges, or just online communities and conferences. And so we wanted to share a few examples here. So this organization did a virtual gala where they actually recorded videos where they still presented the auction items, they still presented their need and their mission. They still dressed up. So they tried to capture the moment of a gala where they dressed up, they did toasts, they got really excited. They tried to make the best of it in their home office. They had a live view of this, and they just were vulnerable and honest, and they were still able to reach their goals. They were able to celebrate. And it was just a great thing where they still were able to capture the essence of what an in-person event would have done, but they were able to do that in a way that still fit within the constraints of the current moment. Another organization that did this was a community that I've been heavily impacted by, which is the Q Ideas group. And they host a conference every year in Nashville for Christian and cultural leaders of faith. And it's an important moment. Like it's the one time a year they gather people together, a lot of conversations, they contextualize the conversations as much as possible. And instead of leaning into what most other conferences were saying, where it's like, this is postponed or this is canceled or we have to make adjustments, they led with this. So look at the subject line. It says Q 2020 is still on. And in a moment, around March 24th, when so many things were off, the fact that they led with that was so powerful because it was like, we are still on. Then they go into explain what that actually means and how they're going to take a new form. But it doesn't mean that we're off. We're not delivering on our mission. We're not going to shy away from what we set out to do. We're just doing that in a new form. And again, I love that posture of confidence and commitment to make sure that their community knew that they were going to show up for them. And then another thing they did really well was a lot of people were unfamiliar with what a virtual or a digital summit would look like. And so they clearly laid out what you can expect. And I think that idea of, being confident and clear, but also then clearly laying out the expectations, especially considering many maybe haven't participated in the digital or virtual conference in the past. And I think that was a great example of what you can do. One thing that we can't lose sight of is the community aspect of what we do as ministries, and looking for ways that even in a physically distant world, how do we still socially and connect and commit to each other? And I think a lot of organizations are doing like online donor communities where maybe they're inviting people in the local, like let's say, we're here in Phoenix. We invite all of our donors in Phoenix to come on a call to learn more about how we're committed to the ministry work and we're moving forward. Something as simple as that can be a really powerful way to still connect and engage with your supporters. The third thing that we recommend as part of this, which we've talked a lot about, and so I won't spend too much time here, is just personalized donor outreach. Now more than ever, reaching out and connecting personally with your donors is essential. And what we've seen in our research, especially here at Virtuous, is that the primary reason donors continue to give is based on their confidence in and connection with the cause of the nonprofit or the ministry. And each of these is really driven through relevant and personal communication. And I think even amidst our crisis, this is more important than ever. And so what we have to do is realize that each of our donors, each of our supporters, each of our constituents are each individuals. They're not rows and columns on a spreadsheet. And so being able to personally reach out and acknowledge that people are seen, they're known, and that we're inviting them in to be a part of something together with others is a powerful way to connect with people, even in amidst this moment, but also in 2020 and beyond. And whether this is through phone and video calls or thank you notes or postcards, personalized letters, or even just video messages. I've seen a lot of creative ways on how nonprofits are just using like simple recorded messages on an iPhone and sending it out to a donor, and then doing another one. They take a minute or two to do. It's very raw and personal, but then they're just sending that off to their supporters. Even connecting program staff wouldn't interact with donors directly with those that are giving, and reducing that distance between the giver and the good is another powerful way that even right now we can connect. I was talking to a partner yesterday, or it's not yesterday, but on Friday, and he was saying that their customers that are missions agencies were actually having their missionaries who are in quarantine still around the world actually record personalized videos and send those out to the supporters that they were connecting with, which was awesome. Number 4 that we'll dive in here, and I know many of you have probably experienced this in your own life, is that the current constraints give you an opportunity to do new programmatic offerings. And so, however, this new design space creates an opportunity for us to think differently about our work, whether it's doing your ministry services online or connecting in a new and different way, or even as, Jonathan's doing right now, like, instead of doing in-person trainings, we have to do online trainings. We wish we were together, but we're using the constraints to come up with creative ways to still connect and engage with each other. And that's an opportunity for you as well. So here's some key questions I would invite you to consider as you're thinking about this. And what we've seen is organizations of all types have actually done this, whether it's arts organizations actually bringing their art exhibits online and actually enhancing the content through 360-degree galleries and even artist commentaries. Or the Cincinnati Zoo actually has been doing digital safaris, which has been really, really neat. And my kids have benefited from that. And I think this is a great summary of the current moment, where the Cincinnati Zoo used the constraints to come up with a creative way to still deliver on their mission, while also being contextually sensitive to the fact that there's tons of kids at home, parents are trying to work from home, and they were able to deliver on kind of this trifecta of needs in this moment and still create something that was relatively, simple. It was just an iPhone video filming and streaming it live, but they've had hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, according to this post. And they've actually received tons and tons of donations because they're delivering on their mission and saying, we rely on ticket sales, so please consider donating to our emergency operating fund to assist us. I think in one day they received 600 donations by just getting creative, which was from, mostly from new donors, which is an incredible opportunity. So number 5 that I'll talk here is digging into your data. Now is a great time to really take inventory and assess your current donor data. We talked a lot about listening already. I think now kind of applying that listening lens to your current data and the current work that you've done with your supporters is a great opportunity, whether that's doing data appends or kind of back office, like back office management things. There's a lot of different ways that you can use the current moment to kind of position yourself well for the future as we emerge from this. And so digging into your data that you currently have is a key and important way to do that. And the last thing I'll kind of touch on before we open up for Q&A and kind of talk through other questions that have already come up is this idea of dynamic versus fixed nurturing. So a lot of organizations, as Gabe already mentioned, rely on kind of this mass approach to their donor cultivation, whether it's sending out 11 appeals and 1 annual campaign appeal, or they send 4 newsletters and 3 fundraising letters. There's kind of a variety of ways that organizations do this, but typically it's based on fixed drop dates and deadlines rather than dynamic nurturing. And responsive fundraising really presents you an opportunity to reorient your campaigns to focus less on these drop dates and more on each individual donor's journey. Each series should be focused on moving a donor to the next step of engagement,
right,
rather than just trying to engage them where they are in that moment. And so some practical ways this looks is actually, instead of focusing on a spring appeal, it's looking at, when a new donor engages with our organization, like how are we cultivating that? That's a key milestone for a donor. And Gabe already mentioned 76% of new donors typically never give again. So it's a huge hole in a lot of our engagement strategies. And so how can we focus on that? How can we reorient that campaign in a way where we can really bring them into the organization and deepen their connection with our cause? Other examples are anniversaries. So if a donor gave to you last March, how can you engage them this March and say, wow, we're so grateful for you being a ministry partner with us for the last year. We know that there's big things ahead, and here are things that typically supporters engage with us on in year 2 of their partnership. And so you're laying out that expectations, you're connecting personally, and you're making strong suggestions on how they can deepen their relationship with you. And then anniversary and birthday campaigns are another great way that you can use dynamic campaigns versus fixed campaigns. And as Gabe mentioned too, technology can really help you do this. And so there's a lot of technology out there, including Virtuous, that can help you kind of create these dynamic campaigns so that they run on a continuous basis rather than kind of a one-time basis, so that you can continually deepen those relationships with your supporters. So Jonathan, I want to stop here and kick it back over to you to help close us out and also kind of summarize some of this that we've been talking about today and answer some questions.
Yeah, one of the main questions we're getting, and I just want to make sure people know this, is will this slide deck be available to us? People want to dig in deeper to some of the examples, and so we'll get this material over to you for sure, so you can spend a little bit more time with it and even examine some of these key takeaways in detail and be thinking those through as well. But yeah, would love to jump into a few questions here, Noah, and some people have submitted some good ones, a lot of folks. And so one of the questions I want to bring up is from Sarah. And Noah, you just mentioned Virtuous is a great platform for learning about the journey of different donors. And Sarah is wondering specifically, what resources exist out there to help us collect this data and learn more about givers so that we can journey with them in a more personalized way. So what resources are out there? Certainly Virtuous is one, and you guys are welcome to share a little bit more for sure about the Virtuous platform, but some other resources maybe as well.
Gabe, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, just in terms of collecting data on donors in general, there's a couple of great sort of hacks that you can use to get started with this really fast. And one of the ones that we recommend, if you're not doing a lot of it today, is running surveys to your donors about once a quarter, right? And you don't have to do your whole donor database at a time. You maybe fill off 20% and you use something as simple as SurveyMonkey. Mm-hmm. And really the goal of the survey is to figure out what your folks are most interested in. Like why do they give to your cause? How much do they know about your cause? What's their level of engagement? And you can begin to take those survey results and segment your folks and understand what makes them tick. And then you use those learnings for your next, the next campaign that you set up or whatever it is. And so I think those quarterly surveys are great. I think connecting digital signals to your broader fundraising efforts is hugely important. So tying email clicks and web visits and specific page visits all the way back to specific donor records, I think is incredibly important. If you're trying to find out engagement levels, if you have a bunch of resources, like if you do adoption and foster care and you have a bunch of resources on your website about how to adopt, and you have a set of donors who are visiting those pages on a monthly basis, that's really, really important to know. And so be able to connect those digital signals back to individual donor accounts, I think is massively important. So sometimes that can be a harder step. I know SurveyMonkey is like it's a 5-minute setup. And so it's something that every nonprofit can begin doing today.
Yeah, I think that right, we've got to learn how to ask the right questions of our givers and partners, and we need to learn how to listen really well. Right? Sometimes we're so busy pitching our own stuff and trying to communicate what we want to communicate. We need to slow down. We need to ask the right questions. We need to listen to answers, and all that helps us to journey with givers in a much more specific and genuine way. Alan and Dwight both raised a version of the same question, which I think is really a great question as well. They're wondering about sort of bridging the gap with being sensitive these days. And so how sensitive, or what does sensitivity look like? And Dwight even specifically said, I'm almost wondering if I need to give a lot of my monthly donors permission to say, hey, it's okay right now if you've lost a job or you're going through hardship or different things like that. So what's the sensitivity factor there, and what would you guys say about that?
Well, I think you still need to ask in even in this time, but I think Dwight's exactly right, is you need to give your donors permission to take a break. And what you don't want to communicate in this time of crisis is that if you stop giving, you're no longer a partner, right? What you need to communicate is yeah, it's an incredibly difficult time. If you need to put it on pause, we're not going to treat you any different. You are still a valuable partner. You are just as much a part of our cause this month as you were last month. That hasn't changed. And when you're ready and financially able, we would love to pick that conversation back up again. And so I think it's, you have to ask, but at the same time, you have to communicate, look, your money is not what made you part of our cause, right? And you're part of the movement no matter what, and that's okay.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Absolutely. And maybe just one more quick question here. David is wondering from a messaging standpoint, and he's right. I mean, people are bombarded with messages. There's a lot of white noise out there. Any quick tips on how we can sort of connect well with people with our messaging? And I know we've talked a lot about the personal connection. And so obviously that helps, but just anything else you guys would say about sort of breaking through the white noise at all?
Yeah, I think it goes like, and I know you said we talked about it already, but I would reiterate it, is that at the end of the day, the work that we all do is people coming together with other people to make an impact in our world that's needed and to come together to work on something. And so and I think the other thing that we all do is in the mornings, we look at our inbox and we prioritize our communication based on what we think is junk or spam or not necessary. The things I would almost challenge you to do on your personal evaluation of your inbox is, what don't you get rid of? And I think for me, it's like when I have a message from a real person that's trying to send this to me. And so there's a lot of research that says, the best way to connect with people is to do it in a personal way, but also to do it in like a plain way. Like, just like you were sending a message to one person, those tend to stand out even when we look at the data, and actually drives increased open rates, increased engagement rates. And so if you want to stand out from the noise, in some ways, the key strategy is to not participate in the noise and actually go around it from a different way. And I think personal connection and personal emails, even if it's sending out to 100 people, but you're writing that email from a personal standpoint, and it doesn't have to be all fancy with your photos and everything like that. It can just be a message. Some of the most powerful emails I've gotten are from CEOs of big companies in the past 30 days. They're like, hey, this is what's going on. Here's a video of what I'm talking about. And there's nothing fancy about that. It's just trying to be genuine and transparent and connect personally. I think that's how you stand or circumvent the noise. I think that's
There's one other, the one other marketing hack that you guys can use. And I think Noah's right. I mean, one thing is get your people that care about your cause to tell their friends and family. So something coming from a friend or family is going to, it goes above the noise automatically, right? So equip your donors and your fans to go out and tell your story for you. That gets through the noise. But the other one, just from a pure messaging standpoint, is use Facebook to test messages. So I know that not a lot of nonprofits that do this right now, but it's not that hard just to get in Facebook, set up a Facebook ad account. And then you're wondering, does my message around this resonate more or this? And you make two different Facebook ads that look very similar, that have a different message. You run them both and you find out which one gets clicked on more and which one gets engaged on with more, right? You spend $250 instead of dropping 40 grand on a consultant to find out which message resonates. Like today, you get the results today, right? So there's some very much some digital hacks that you can use too to begin to understand what drives engagement.
Yep.
That's great. That's great. Well, guys, we've got just about a minute left here. Will you guys talk to us a little bit about the responsive fundraising book that you just put out, the playbook, this pack, how people can get a hold of it, and we'll also send out some information on that as well. And I understand you've got a really great summit coming up that I was reading about that looks really interesting. So share just a word about that, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we mentioned, Gabe and McKenna, who are both on our team, recently published a book all about responsive fundraising. You can learn more about that on virtuouscrm.com/responsive. But if you want like kind of a resource pack, we've put one together for those participating in today's presentation. So if you just send me a quick email, like nothing fancy, just subject line Venture 19, and I'll send you kind of an overview pack with additional resources.
Great.
So feel free to do that. I'll follow up on that. But we also want to make sure everyone's invited. If you valued this conversation, we're actually extending this. So we have 10 speakers tomorrow, April 22nd, participating in a 3-hour conversation. You can jump in and out, but if you go to responsivenonprofitsummit.com, you can register for free. And it's not just Gabe and I talking, it's actually experts that are working all around the country with different types of organizations, including the previous CEO of Food for the Hungry, the AFP board president, some fundraising consultants. It's going to be an incredible event.
Awesome. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and for everybody that joined us. We had people join us not just from Arizona, but from around the country, and just a great time. I will send out follow-up information. We'll get you the presentation information. If we didn't get to some of your questions, I'll be addressing those via email. And but Noah, Gabe, thanks so much for joining us today.
That's our pleasure. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks,
Jonathan. Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon online. God bless.
Cheers.